Jake Donovan was a cowboy, tough and used to the challenges of the wild frontier. He had spent most of his life riding through the vast open plains, working the land and moving cattle. His horse Thunder was his loyal companion through it all. Thunder wasn't just a horse to Jake. He was a friend, a partner, and someone who had helped him through the hardest times. It was a late afternoon when disaster struck. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting long shadows across the desert. The dry heat of the day had slowly turned to a cool evening breeze as Jake and Thunder made their way through a narrow valley. It was a quiet, peaceful ride, just the two of them enjoying the solitude of the land. Jake always felt at peace in the wilderness, the vastness around him offering a sense of freedom that he couldn't find anywhere else. As they crossed a small creek, Thunder stopped suddenly, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. Jake pulled on the reins, slowing his horse. "What is it, boy?" Jake muttered, looking around. He didn't see anything out of the ordinary, just the usual desert brush and rock formations. But Thunder, who had been his faithful companion for years, was acting strange. Before Jake could react, Thunder let out a loud snort and reared up, throwing Jake off balance. The cowboy landed hard on the ground, the wind knocked out of him. He quickly scrambled to his feet, reaching for his rifle instinctively, but then he saw it. The rattlesnake coiled and ready to strike. Thunder was already on the ground, his side heaving as he pawed at the dirt in pain. Jake's heart sank. The snake had struck. He could see the bite marks, 2 small puncture wounds on Thunder's leg. The venom was spreading fast. Thunder's breathing became shallow and ragged, his muscles twitching as the poison worked its way through his system. Jake rushed to his horse's side, shouting for help that he knew wasn't coming. They were alone, miles from the nearest town or ranch. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew enough to understand that this was bad. The venom would kill Thunder if he didn't do something fast. He tried to stay calm, but panic was creeping in. His hands shook as he searched through his saddlebags, looking for any supplies he might have. But all he had were some dried herbs for pain relief, and he knew that wouldn't be enough. There was nothing he could do. Thunder was dying, and Jake couldn't stop it. Jake knelt beside his horse, speaking softly to him, trying to comfort him in those final moments. "Stay with me, boy," Jake whispered, running a hand over Thunder's mane. He had raised Thunder from a colt. He had been there when Thunder learned how to ride, when he was just a wild stallion with no trust in anyone. Over the years, they had formed an unbreakable bond. Thunder had been with him through thick and thin, never leaving his side, always loyal. Jake felt a lump in his throat as he thought about losing him. "I'm sorry, Thunder," Jake muttered. "I can't save you." "I'm sorry." Thunder's head drooped and his body began to tremble. Jake held back the tears that threatened to spill. He couldn't let Thunder see him weak. He couldn't show his horse that he had given up. But deep down, Jake knew that his companion wasn't going to make it. His own heart felt heavy, as if the life was draining out of him with every breath that Thunder took. Jake stood up, pacing back and forth. There was nothing he could do. He was helpless, stuck in the middle of nowhere with his horse dying. He looked around, half hoping someone might come along and save them, but there was no one. The land was vast and empty. It was just him and Thunder was slipping away. Just as Jake was about to lose all hope, he heard a voice. "Your horse needs help." Jake froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle again. But the woman who stood before him wasn't a threat. She was an Apache woman, her dark eyes sharp and full of purpose. She was riding a beautiful black horse, her posture confident and calm. Her face was painted with the faint markings of her tribe, and her long black hair blew gently in the wind. She had an air about her that immediately put Jake at ease, even though he didn't know her and wasn't sure what she was doing out here. Jake glanced at Thunder, who was still struggling to stay on his feet. "He's been bitten by a rattler," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know what to do. I've tried everything I can." The Apache woman dismounted gracefully, her movements fluid and assured. She walked over to Thunder, who was now lying on the ground, his body still trembling. "I have a cure," she said, her voice soft but confident. Jake blinked in surprise. A cure for a rattlesnake bite? He had never heard of such a thing. He was skeptical but desperate. He looked down at his horse, still in pain, and his heart broke. He had no other choice. "I'll take any help I can get," Jake replied, stepping back to give her space. The woman nodded as if she had expected no less. She knelt down beside Thunder and began to assess the bite. Jake stood back, unsure of what to do but watching carefully, hoping against hope that this woman might be able to save his horse. The Apache woman worked quickly, her hands steady as she gathered herbs from around the area. She spoke to herself in a language Jake didn't understand, but her calm demeanor and focused attention gave him a sense of peace. She wasn't panicking like he had been. She wasn't afraid of the venom or the danger. She was simply doing what she had to do, and that gave Jake a glimmer of hope. Jake felt a strange sense of awe as he watched her work. Here was a woman, someone he had just met, and yet she was more confident in this situation than he had ever been in his life. He realized how little he knew about the land and the people who lived on it. There was so much more to this world than he had ever seen, and this woman, this Apache woman, was showing him something he had never imagined. As she finished applying the mixture to Thunder's wound, she looked up at Jake. "It will take time," she said, "but your horse will survive." Jake's eyes filled with tears again, but this time it wasn't from despair. It was from relief. Thunder was going to be okay. And maybe, just maybe, Jake wasn't as alone in this world as he had thought. The Apache woman stood and stepped back, her work done for now. She didn't wait for a thank you as though it was nothing, but to Jake it meant everything. She had given him hope when he had none, and for that he was deeply grateful. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jake allowed himself to relax, just a little. He stood next to Thunder, watching the sun slowly sink lower in the sky, and felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Jake stood still beside his horse, watching with cautious optimism as the Apache woman worked her magic. Thunder's breathing had slowed, and the pain he had seen in his eyes just moments before was beginning to fade. The herbal mixture she had applied seemed to be doing something. Jake couldn't explain it, but he could see that Thunder wasn't in as much distress as he had been. For the first time in what felt like forever, hope began to bloom in his chest. The Apache woman, whose name Jake still didn't know, moved around the horse with purpose. She kept her movements calm and deliberate, almost as if she had done this countless times before. Jake had to admit there was a quiet strength in her presence that he hadn't expected. He had heard stories about Native American tribes and their connection to the land, but he had never truly understood the depth of their knowledge until now. "How did you know how to do this?" Jake asked, his voice low and filled with curiosity. The Apache woman didn't immediately answer. She continued to check Thunder's condition, making sure the mixture she had applied hadn't been washed away by the sweat on his horse's body. Jake waited, unsure if she would answer at all. He had to know more. He had to understand how someone so different from him could save his horse when he had felt so powerless. Finally, after a long moment, she turned to him. "My people have lived with this land for generations," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "We know its secrets. We understand the plants, the animals, the rhythms of the earth. We learn what it takes to survive, and we pass that knowledge down." Jake listened closely, absorbing every word. He had always considered himself resourceful. He had survived on his own for years, moving from place to place, relying on his skills and his instincts. But standing here with the Apache woman working beside him, Jake realized that he had barely scratched the surface of what it meant to truly understand the land. "Thunder," Jake whispered, running his hand over his horse's mane. "He's all I have. I don't know what I'd do without him." The Apache woman glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "You're not alone," she said quietly. "We all have our companions. Sometimes they come in forms we don't expect." Jake wasn't sure what she meant by that, but he nodded in appreciation. It seemed like the right thing to do. Thunder was still breathing steadily, his condition improving with each passing minute. Jake felt a deep sense of relief washing over him. He hadn't realized just how much he had feared losing his horse until that moment. Now he wasn't sure what to feel: gratefulness, awe, or a mixture of both. As the evening light began to fade and the stars started to twinkle in the sky, the Apache woman began to pack her things. She seemed to be preparing to leave, but Jake wasn't ready to let her go just yet. "Wait," he called out, surprising himself. "Can you stay? I'd like to learn more. I don't know what I did to deserve your help, but I'd like to return the favor if I can." The woman looked back at him, her eyes soft but intense. She didn't speak right away, as if considering his request. Then with a small nod, she said, "I'll stay for a while. You and your horse need rest." Jake felt a wave of gratitude flood through him. He hadn't expected her to stay, but he was glad she had agreed. He had questions. So many questions. He had lived on this land for years, but he had never truly understood it. Now standing next to this woman, he knew he had a lot to learn. The Apache woman stayed the night sitting by the campfire while Jake and Thunder rested. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were thoughtful and wise. She told stories of her people, of the land, and of the old ways. Jake listened intently, absorbing every bit of knowledge she shared. As the fire crackled, Jake realized that he had never really taken the time to understand the world around him. He had always been focused on surviving, getting by, and moving on to the next place. But now, with this woman beside him, he was starting to see things differently. There was more to life than just survival. There was a deeper connection to the earth, to the people who lived on it, and to the creatures that shared it with them. The next morning, when the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, Jake was up early. Thunder was standing by the camp looking stronger and more alert than he had the day before. Jake couldn't believe his eyes. It was as though the venom had been completely drained from his horse's system. "Thank you," Jake said to the Apache woman, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you." The Apache woman simply nodded as if the matter was of no consequence. "Repay me by learning," she said. "Learn the land. Learn the ways of those who live with it. That is the greatest gift you can give." Jake stood in silence, his heart swelling with gratitude. He realized that this encounter, this unexpected meeting with the Apache woman, had changed him. He wasn't the same cowboy who had ridden into the valley just days before, desperate and alone. He had learned something far more valuable than how to survive. He had learned how to connect, how to live in harmony with the world around him. As the Apache woman mounted her horse, preparing to leave, Jake knew he wouldn't forget her. He would never forget the kindness she had shown him, or the wisdom she had shared. And as she rode off into the distance, he felt something stir inside him, a sense of purpose, of understanding. The world was vast, and there was so much more to discover. And Jake Donovan, the cowboy who had once believed he was alone, was now ready to embrace it all. He watched the woman disappear over the horizon, Thunder standing tall and strong beside him. For the first time in a long while, Jake felt a deep sense of peace. Maybe he hadn't been alone after all. And as he turned his horse toward the open plains, Jake knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would be full of learning, healing, and unexpected connections.